Our next speaker today is George Hemingway. George will speak on the power of purpose. George is the representative of Stratalis Consulting. Stratalis is the recipient of the 2021 Robert E. Murray Innovation Award. And Mr. Hemingway will receive the award at the SME banquet on Wednesday evening. George serves as the managing partner and head of the innovation practice at Stratalis, a growth strategy and innovation consultancy where he advises the heads of companies, organizations, and countries on the future and how to conquer uncertainty. Through his work, he's collaborated with the leading global mining companies to set their future visions and reimagine what's possible from industrial and mining companies. George is considered one of the leading futurists in the mining industry, having delivered over 100 keynotes on uncertainty, innovation, and the future at venues ranging from the World Mining Congress to S&P Global, from Nasser to the Pentagon, and at leading universities and organizations worldwide. His work in techno, economic, and futures modeling for the mining industry has won awards for innovation in 2019 and 2020, and he's been named a top 10 leader in mining technologies. He's a published author and a monthly columnist on the future of industry and disruption. Please join me in welcoming George Hemingway.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Oh, we can do a little bit better than that. Good morning, everybody. There we go. Got to get a little blood flowing. So good morning. Thank you very much to SME, and thank you very much to all of you for having me today. You guys have really traveled quite a distance, some of you, to come here today. That really speaks a lot to the importance of the mining industry to you and conferences like this. So thank you very much for being here. I'm here today to talk to you about the power of purpose and how our own quest for meaning could mean the difference in helping the mining industry in its quest to transform. I'll briefly just speak a little bit about Stratalis. As my introduction mentioned, I'm the managing partner of this company, and we spend a lot of our time thinking about the future, thinking about uncertainty. It's really what we advise CEOs and leaders and heads of state on. And the last few years have been, well, very uncertain, haven't they? In the mining industry in particular, we focused a lot, especially on some of the showstoppers, the greatest issues in the last couple of years that have really represented a challenge for the industry as a whole. Tailings, GHG, rock bursts, seismicity, and some that are a little less technical. The deficit of trust that's facing the mining industry as it seeks to transform, and one that will become more and more important just at this point at which technology is reaching its apex and which the actual transformation of mining as we know it is going to be possible. So I want to start with a question. I'm going to ask you to genuinely think about this. Why are you here today? Are you here because you have to be? Or are you here because you want to be? And if no one else was watching, would you still be here? Understanding why you do what you do, not just what you do, is critical. And it's going to be critical as well for the mining industry in the future. So we're living in incredibly uncertain times. And the challenge for me is that I've spent the last 20 years focusing on, well, being an expert in uncertainty, and everybody else seems to have caught up with me in the last 2. I mean, let's think about it. We've had murder hornets. We've had inflation. We've got a recession. We have COVID waves. And now we have war. I mean, there's nothing that you can really rely upon. Our friends are our enemies. And our enemies became our friends. And now they're our enemies again. Even man's best friend can't be relied upon in these trying times. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but there was a point during the pandemic when we were vaccinating zoo animals. And let's face it, if you're looking for health care, sometimes a zoo is about as good as it got in the last couple of years. Now, what's interesting, all joking aside, is that we human beings tend to be very resilient. It's one of the things I think have to be admired about us. Do you remember what you were doing 24 months ago today? I actually do. I was flying to give a speech at PDAC in Toronto. And this This was the cover of the Wall Street Journal 24 months ago today. As you can see, we just got our first case of COVID in New York, and the experts say that the risk was still low. It's amazing what a last crazy couple of years it's been. But as I said, what defines us as human beings is how resilient we are. At least for me, I find that despite all of the challenges, most people are back to the normal things they've been doing all the time. We've been fighting with our families, fighting about who's going to cause a recession first, us or China, fighting about war, fighting to understand how to keep the people who work for us from leaving. In the most uncertain of times, what we found at Stratalis through our work is that people tend to react in the most predictable of ways. About half the population grounds themselves in something that gives them comfort: tradition, religion, family. The other half of the population tends to find something that they can control, something that they can rally against, some injustice they can fight, whatever that might be. Years ago it was Occupy Wall Street. Last year it was Black Lives Matter. Whether you're rallying against social injustice, or you're rallying against industry, or you're rallying against wealthy people, this uncertainty, this desire to control, this need to change will have a massive impact not just on our society, but on the mining industry as well. And in fact, all major industries within the crosshairs. As an example, look at the aviation industry, right? This is an industry that's in the crosshairs. It doesn't even know it yet in some ways. It started a few years ago with Boeing. You might remember some issues with the 737 MAX. And then there were crashes, right? And then after that, people realized, hey, it's COVID. We really don't need to fly that much. Maybe we don't need to travel that much at all. Plus, let's face it, airlines pump out a lot of GHGs. You add on top of that billionaires rocketing off into the stratosphere on joyrides in the middle of a recession, people canceling flights, 5G meaning you can't get on a plane, and it all seems seemingly disconnected. But what it is a mature industry desperately needing to change, facing pressure from the outside to do all these things: GHGs, safety, so forth and so on. And internally, meeting that resistance that's making it difficult to happen. This desire from the outside world for change, clawing for someone and something to blame, and the need for these industries to genuinely change, but resisting to do so, is going to be a major challenge for all industrial companies, and natural resources is naturally no exception. What is clear is this: people are unhappy. Society is unhappy, and they are looking for scapegoats. And all large businesses, pharmaceuticals, banking, aviation, natural resources, are still very much in their crosshairs. So what do you do in a world in which everything is seen, and anything that can be seen can be canceled? Now take a look at my friend Kermit the Frog over here. He's had a rough couple of years, what with the COVID-19. I myself have suffered a bit from the COVID-19, well, like the COVID-25, but not as bad as his ex-girlfriend, Miss Piggy, who's been taken off television because, well, she couldn't take no for an answer. Or joining that rogues gallery with her, Pepe Le Pew, who didn't appear in Space Jam 2 because, well, he really couldn't take no for an answer. Or these guys, Facebook, who've had a very bad, terrible, no good couple of years, for maybe a couple of good reasons. You know, it's an interesting thing. A few months ago, as you all might remember, Facebook and its brethren, WhatsApp and Instagram, went down for like several hours, and then everyone ran to Twitter to write that, Facebook and WhatsApp are down because the internet is breaking and it's so terrible. Because it seems to be doing that an awful lot nowadays. And while that was all cute and everything, people said, hey, maybe we don't need Facebook. Because the next day a whistleblower showed up, sat in front of Congress and said, these guys are really terrible. They're ruining our children. They're ruining democracy. Maybe we don't need them. Maybe we should cancel Facebook. Now, Facebook didn't get canceled yet for a lot of interesting reasons. But what is happening is that people are trying to cancel Facebook, and there's a reason for that. We don't trust them. It started with Cambridge Analytica, and it's continued for very, very many other reasons. Even Facebook knows this. That's why they went ahead and canceled themselves. Just by design, but there's only so much that branding and cool programs can do if you don't have advocates to back you up. Can you cancel Facebook? Yeah, you can cancel Facebook. Can you cancel mining? Well, I'm going to go with the groupthink on this and say no. You can't cancel mining. Not yet. But you can cancel miners. And you can make it a very, very unpleasant and very, very expensive place to do business. Now, the thing with Facebook, right, is that it kind of breeds a question. Do we hate Facebook? Or do we just hate the ugliness that is the internet right now? Does society actually hate mining, as so many would say? Or do we just hate a few bad actors? Or maybe in some places, do you just not like coal miners? Sorry, coal miners. If you're Facebook, you can't ignore the perception of the world around the internet. And if you're an upstanding mining company, which I assume everyone here is, you can't ignore society's perception of a few bad actors. The rising tide rises all ships or brings them all down. And the challenge is that it's very difficult to have a single unified message, especially if it's coming from a mining company. And one of the reasons for this is that, if you face it, this mining industry is something that we put on ourselves, but really, there isn't one mining industry. I mean, lithium has nothing to do with potash. Diamonds have nothing to do with base metals. Let's face it, most of the base metals miners do their best to make sure the world doesn't think that they were in coal, which they all were until very recently. And the people in gold, well, they play by an entirely different game of supply and demand that I don't even understand. It makes it even more challenging for us to have a single unified message as an industry when we ourselves are not unified. For good reason. What ties us together? We take stuff out of the ground. Oh, and society puts us in the same bucket. And it doesn't help that if you think about it, the strategy, sometimes a good strategy for any one mining company, is to draw a thin green line between themselves and the rest of the industry. But that doesn't exactly breed trust. It doesn't exactly breed permission for an industry as a whole. And here's the challenge. Any one mining company faces a Facebook problem. Now, what I mean is this. At the end of the day, Facebook, as resilient as it was, as much as people buy stock, can only withstand so much. Google is up, Amazon is up, and let's face it, Jeff Bezos has not had a really great personal year. And Mark Zuckerberg is out there, he's trying to say the right things, but that's the stock. How do you transform when you're not trusted? And if you're a mining company or the mining industry, how do you build that trust in order to transform? Here's the challenge, right? Facebook changes its name, mining company changes its name, cigarette company changes its name. But that isn't enough. It doesn't breed true authenticity. As we can see, what just happened to the CEO of Shell this past year, right? And it showed up at the conference in Glasgow. Got ripped apart in the media and also by this young lady. And then essentially we're told, hey, you and your brethren are not welcome here. A challenge of transformation. And here's the really interesting bit. As the gentleman before me said, the world needs mining in order to transform. To meet the GHG neutral requirements and the desire for the world to change, we need all those metals. We need all those minerals. But how are we going to get them? Because the challenge will be, as the world's population increases, as third world nations become first world nations, as we grow in our demands for new things, at the same time the mining industry has promised that, we're going to keep CapEx low, and we're going to still make money. And did I mention 30%? No, 40%, thanks Rio Tinto. GHG reduction by 2030. 100% by 2050. How is the mining industry going to transform in order to make this possible in an ever-increasing, growing world in which you're trying to be canceled? Something has to change. So the key here is trust. Trust is the new competitive advantage for any mining company and frankly for the industry as a whole. And 2 years ago, Stratalis went ahead and we interviewed about 100 CEOs of the world's largest mining companies, and we asked them, what are the top 3 things in your agenda? What keeps you up at night? And I have to mention, COVID wasn't one of them, so we kind of screwed up there. Didn't see that coming. But what they said is, look, all the social license issues are the greatest challenge for us. Trust and building trust is what we're going to need in order to transform as an industry. Trust is the advantage we don't have and the advantage that we do need. And transformation is coming. I mean, if you think about it, right? We've been talking for decades about electric cars and electric vehicles. We've been talking, I think 10, 15 years ago, the whole thing was mechanization and automation and, artificial intelligence, whatever that means. And it's going to take jobs. And it didn't. So far the Luddites have been wrong, but here's the thing. Automation and mechanization and artificial intelligence have gotten to a point where they actually are a reality, where they will happen. And mining companies are at the forefront of trying to adopt these things because they need to be. How do you go ahead and transform in a world where now even your own workforce is worried about you, where the very fundamentals that have kept the mining industry going, that we are good for the societies that are around us, that we provide jobs, that we provide income, face an interesting cliff? So the funny thing, right, is you look at all the obvious stuff, as we have AI and mechanization and Lord knows what else, and you never know where the showstoppers come from, because they always come from the place you're not looking. So while you're doing that, a tailings dam or 2 falls, right? Or there's an issue with water. What do you do in these situations? You don't know where the showstopper is coming from. You don't know where the uncertainty is coming from. How do you prepare for an uncertain world? The answer is, you have to build a currency of trust, a warm quilt of trust, a blanket that you put around yourself in the most certain of times so that you can prepare for when things get tough. And that is what the industry needs to do, build that trust quilt. Now, look, in fairness, the mining industry, especially the largest miners, are trying to do just that. They're adopting UN standards, they're making changes, they're doing what they need to do, and they're trying to speak the right words and the right messages, and that's good. But the challenge is that advertising, especially advertising coming from companies, only goes so far. It's good with regulators, it's helpful with politicians, it can even help you in hiring, but the kind of change that is needed in trust needs to happen faster than any advertising message can bring. It's going to take a different kind of movement. Now, one way of looking at this, right, fun way of looking at it, is looking at companies that presumably do this well. Tesla and Apple are one of these types of companies. They've managed to take commodities, right, and almost make them seem virtuous, like they're not just insulating their brands, but they're doing good for society at the same time. And as has already been said, these are companies that need the metals and minerals more than anyone else in order to transform. But they've managed to draw, again, this sort of thin green line between themselves and, well, the mining industry. So much so that Apple went ahead and invented a whole new kind of aluminum just to remind the world that, you know, it's not that kind of metal. Look, the point here, right, is what they've done, with some degree of success, is manage to imbue themselves with goodwill. They're calling to a higher purpose, one that society buys into and likes to hear. Now, mining industry has certain metals where this is easier than others. Lithium, nickel, cobalt, right? These are things we all know we need as a society. Yeah, even the average Jane and Joe kind of knows, in order to run your car. Now look, has Resolution Copper made an argument to my dad that in 2035, his Tesla is going to need their metals in order to run? No, but if they tried, it wouldn't be that much of a stretch. But not every metal and not every mining company and not every mineral and not every aggregate is facing the same particular easy route to building purpose. Now, why these things work for Tesla, why they work for Apple, is not because the mining companies or Apple or Tesla go ahead and say it to us, it's because the greatest advocates for Apple or Tesla are you and I, regular people. I mean, she's interesting, but hey, not out of whack with reality. The greatest advocates for these brands are society. They spoke to a higher purpose, a purpose that spoke to the hearts of others, and they go ahead and advocate for them. And that's why that breeds authenticity. There's some things that just aren't authentic. American poutine, gas station sushi. I was going to ask a question, has anyone here ever eaten gas station sushi? But then I realized at this point you probably won't raise your hands. Companies telling you to trust them. Trust doesn't work that way. Authenticity comes from a different place. Purpose comes from the heart. It's something you feel. It's something others feel and share with you. It's not something that someone tells you to feel for them. You know, it's interesting. Mining is such an important part of the world. It's a basic thing, like farming or healthcare. If you're a farmer, you know you don't just grow corn, you feed the world. If you're in healthcare, you don't make drugs, you heal the world. And that purpose, that authenticity, that meaning of what matters, not what you do, but why you do it. It's a blanket across everyone in the industry, from the person in procurement that makes sure that syringes are there so that the drugs can be injected, to the person that delivers the potash to make sure that the corn can grow. They feed the world, they heal the world. Mining builds the world. What's interesting is the place we should probably look for this authenticity, for this purpose in mining, is probably one of the greatest showstoppers, one of the greatest sources of uncertainty in the industry in the last few years. Tailings. Spent the last few years helping a lot of the big mining companies think through their strategies on tailings, and we've noticed something interesting. If you speak to the people that work in tailings, the professionals that deal with that nowadays, you may notice something a little different than you noticed a few years ago. These are people who have purpose. They know what they do matters. They prevent failures. They stand guard. They save lives. It's not just what they do, but why they do it that drives them. And I would go so far as to say that if push came to shove, and they had to stand up for what was right, most, if not all of them, would do so because they know what they do matters. And that passion, that authenticity, it breeds trust. And you trust in people, not in companies. But those people are what drives our belief. So here's a question. The person in procurement, the one that's making sure that, I don't know, trucks are available when they need to be, does she know why what she does matters to the world? Does she know how she helps to drive change? The person in digital that's building an app so you know when the scoop shows up at the face. I mean, this person couldn't be farther away from breaking a rock as possible. Does he know why what he does matters? Does he have purpose? You know, it's interesting. COVID has caused a lot of us to take a fresh look at our whys, why we do what we do. And that's why you see the great migration, people leaving and coming in and out of jobs. It's why you see divorces. It's why you see weddings. We're kind of going through a global midlife crisis, if you will. And the fascinating bit about all this is that it causes us to think differently about why we do what we do and what matters to us. So, I'm wondering, I want to pivot a little bit to some more topical news items right now. As many of us have done in the last few days, the Ukraine has been front of mind. And is there any greater David versus Goliath story than what is going on in the Ukraine right now? Yesterday, I listened to President Zelensky's 8-minute speech, and I am somewhat in awe of the way that the world has reacted in a personal way and has come and rallied to his aid, oftentimes quite surprisingly, in support of a very clear message and a very clear purpose. And here's why. Vladimir Putin is a master of messaging, right? I mean, this guy is really good at what he does. Some would say so good that he was able to influence the election of one of the world's great superpowers. And what's he saying to us? He comes to us with a message of goodwill. He is freeing the Ukraine from fascism, from Nazis, because let's face it, nobody likes Nazis. He is preventing genocide of the Russian people in Ukraine, and he is fighting for freedom, as he must, as we would do. And he has both right and God on his side. This carefully crafted message by the Russian media machine, 3 years in the making, has been sent to us in the most carefully crafted way possible, singular as it is. And look at the world that he has ready for it. An America divided, a Europe reliant on his energy. This should be an easy win for Vlad. But up stands Zelensky. Your competition is a former comic as president and mayor of the largest city, an ex-heavyweight boxer. And we, the United States, go and we said, hey, look, things aren't looking great. We can get you out of there. You can set up a government in exile. And what does he say? This man has a purpose, unshakable. He knows his why. He says, the fight is here. I need ammunition, not a ride. He doesn't need a ride. He needs our help. He's very clear on what matters. And then he goes ahead and he connects it in the most human of ways. He says, me, attack my own people. Someone who spent his time here, where my best friend's mother lives, where his father is buried, where he's rooted with them. He connects his purpose, his why, in a very human way, reminding us why it should matter to us as human beings, and then reminding us why it should matter to us in the most selfish ways, because they'll come for us, and then they'll come for you. The most powerful part of this is not Zelensky's message. Yes, it's important that the president delivers it. No question about that. But the most powerful part of this is a million messages that came along with it. Messages from normal people sharing their whys, sharing their purposes, sharing what matters to them. Zelensky knows his why, he knows his purpose, he shares it, and the reason it works is because he creates a fabric, a quilt that we can all believe in. And the result? Well, the results are remarkable. Because his why resonates not just with us on an intellectual level, it connects to our whys as well. And hey, what can you do with that? Germany, a country that, let's face it, needs an energy supply, more or less cancels the Nord Stream pipeline. Germany, a country that needs the money and needs to be able to pay the Russians, as so many do, goes ahead and supports cutting Russia off from SWIFT. And Germany, a country who for many very good reasons tries not to send weapons into military conflicts, sending weapons into an active military conflict. And it's not just Germany. Look at the Brits. These are people who actually left Europe. They Brexited because they didn't want any of the continental silliness. And you have the foreign minister of Britain saying, you know what? Any Britons want to go over there and fight for the Ukraine? You can make your own decisions. It's unprecedented. And it goes on. The purpose matters and connects in such a way, not the what, but the why, that yesterday the former Prime Minister of Japan says, you know, we should consider allowing America to put nukes here. That's unprecedented. That's mind-blowing to me. Of everything else I heard, this one just blows my mind. And why? Because a single purpose made up of a quilt, a fabric of many, many other whys, has resonated with the world. And the world is rising as best as it can to answer. Heck, even the Russians are protesting. How do you fight a Goliath? With 1,000,000 Davids. The message here for the mining industry is very clear. We are facing a wave of Goliaths, a wave of change. And no single message from any one mining company or even industry body will be enough to stem the tide. We need 1,000,000 Davids of our own. So I ask you again, and think of it just for a moment. What is my why? Why do I work in mining? Why am I here today? If you don't know your why, if you don't know your purpose, ask your friends. Ask around. Ask others what their why is. See if it resonates with you, and then go deeper. And ask yourself, not just why does my why matter, but why should my why matter to a fisherman on the East Coast, or children playing down the street, or a grandmother in her yard? That why is critical, creating that fabric of 1,000,000 Davids, 1,000,000 voices, that quilt that needs to be built in order to resist the most uncertain of times. More than ever, it is important that we understand our why, we understand our purpose, and then, and this is the really important part, we share our story. Ask yourself, how would I respond if a total stranger came up to me, maybe someone that doesn't like the mining industry, and asked me, so why do you work in mining? What's the answer you would give? Why? By sharing your story, you go out and act as an advocate not just for yourself, but for the industry as a whole, for the good we do. Because let's face it, if you're in the mining industry and you came and you stayed and you're still here, you are a part of the reason why the mining industry delivers good to the world. Why is what is needed to transform the mining industry, and your why is the key to it all. Through that, we build a quilt, a fabric that protects us in the most uncertain of times, and we build trust and authenticity. More than ever, it is not what we do, but why we do it that matters. And it is how we will build the quilt that will protect us and our industry, who we need to become advocates for in the most uncertain of times. Thank you.